Well, for the first time in a long time, we have some actual hockey news to report. In the last couple of days, there has been progression between the NHLPA and the NHL on a return to play format, and it looks like we're getting closer and closer to finding out exactly what that looks like. We have lots of details, and a lot still could change. But guys, let's talk about a hypothetical situation. We fast forward. We're talking it's late July. The NHL's back. We know we're a week away from this format starting up. It is the Blue Jackets versus the Maple Leafs in round one. Chris, let me start by asking you.
Classic foes, Shawn, a matchup of two bitter rivals.
Yes, the history goes deep. Let me ask you, Siege, I'm going to put you in the position of maybe the Maple Leafs management or the players. You find out about this, you're going up against the Blue Jackets. Just how do you feel about this matchup? It's different, but what do you think their mindset would be?
Well, I think you like where you stand, obviously, from a high-end talent standpoint. The Leafs have the superstars in the series, so to speak, and so, players that could be game breakers in those scenarios. But, I think you'd be a little bit nervous about this. I mean, look, any team you play, there's going to be some strengths and weaknesses that stand up. But, you have a John Tortorella coach team that, really was one of the surprises of the NHL in the 2019-20 season, the way they were able to play beyond losing some of their stars like Artemi Panarin, Matt Duchene, Sergei Bobrovsky last offseason, and really buckled down defensively. And on top of that, the fact that they got goaltending from two goaltenders, not just one, and Elvis Merzlikins and Jonas Korpisalo, I think that gives them a benefit, because on the other side of this long pause, I think the goaltending is going to be the toughest to handicap, how those players come back. Obviously, they have so much stake in what happens. And so, it's going to be sort of an intriguing battle because, as I say, I think the Leafs have players that can break through and will certainly get some attention from the Blue Jackets. But I think the Blue Jackets will find a way to play tight and sort of in their coach's mold, because, John Tortorella was one of the top coaches this year in the NHL.
So that is a perspective maybe from the Maple Leafs. Steve Dangle, I'll ask you to speak on the fans' behalf. And from their perspective, a lot of fans probably before the pandemic were preparing for the Lightning. They were getting mentally set for that matchup. And it was a matchup that was exciting. I think a lot of people were pretty pumped. And, what do you feel about this new look? It's different. It's unique. So as a fan, how do you feel about the Maple Leafs versus the Blue Jackets?
Well, it's funny that you said, bitter rivals. Like I actually thought the Leafs matchups against the Blue Jackets over the past few years, I guess over the Matthews era, have actually been pretty spirited, kind of nasty, kind of chippy. And the Blue Jackets have, I think, played the Leafs extremely well. I don't know what the record is going back and forth. I think both teams have taken chunks out of each other, but I never got the impression that they liked each other. Right. But there's so many factors here. The Blue Jackets are getting more players back than anyone else. So will they be the freshest or maybe the rustiest? I have absolutely no idea. The John Tortorella coaching factor, I think he can absolutely win a 3-game series just based on motivation alone. But with so little time to prepare in such a short series, how much is coaching actually a factor? I feel like the Leafs play this really fun style at the beginning of every season where they score like 7 or 8 goals a game, and they get bit a few times, but it's not until November or so when teams go, I guess we have to actually start playing defense, that they seem to hit a bump in the road. So I have absolutely no idea what is going to come out of this, but I do think the Blue Jackets are a really tough matchup for the Leafs.
And from a storyline standpoint, what's kind of cool is I feel like these teams have lined up with their needs in a lot of ways. And what I mean by that is, last summer when Mitch Marner was a restricted free agent, I know Columbus was one of the teams that at least explored the idea of an offer sheet because they first of all, they had cap space, but I think they have what, they need a little bit what the Leafs have in excess, which is star power up front. But they also have a great blue line, which is, obviously a talking point for Toronto going back 5 or 6 seasons in needing those things. So, at some point in the future, I'm not saying it's going to be now, that there's probably a trade that needs to happen or could happen between these teams. And I think that's just one more little wrinkle that'll go into what we're talking about when they play.
Now, I'll ask both of you this. There are some teams, let's say hypothetically, like the Montreal Canadiens, that were very much on the outside looking in, who now have a shot, and maybe their fans feel fortunate or surprised that all of a sudden they're back into the playoff mix with this new format. And there may be a team like the Edmonton Oilers who might not get the fairest shake as if it was a normal playoff format. Where do the Leafs fall in that category of getting a good matchup or maybe things not going in their way? Where do you find that sits with Leaf fans right now?
Tell us, Steve.
Well, here were your two options, Leaf fans who are not so happy with this format. You had the Boston Bruins, who were the best team in the NHL, bar none, I thought. If you look at their shootout record, I don't think they had a single win. So if you take that as an indicator of they might have even been better than their record showed, it's a scary concept. Or you get to take on the Tampa Bay Lightning, who I don't even think were in a playoff spot until we were sometime around sniffing Christmas, and then proceeded to be one of the best teams, if not the best teams in the National Hockey League. They might have even had a better record than the Bruins since then. So you don't have to play them right away. You get a nice little warm-up against the Columbus Blue Jackets. If you can't beat them, you can't beat the Bruins and you can't beat the Lightning. So this is a great way for them to test out their skills. And do you want hockey back or not, for crying out loud? They have to pick a format. This is the one they picked. Uncle, I give up. Just play. Let's have fun.
Well, now have our –
I was going to say, we'll see what happens here, Shawn. But to me, I think these teams that play the best of 5 play-ins are going to be advantaged in this situation and getting battle tested that way. I mean, obviously, 4 of them on the Eastern Conference will promptly have their season end. But, if the Leafs are one of the ones that's able to win, I think it's going to be a springboard, because then in the next sort of round, you're playing a team that hasn't been playing something that means as much. And so I think that this could be a sneaky benefit to a team like the Leafs or anyone that manages to win. And let's not forget, when the season was paused, the Leafs weren't home and cooled yet. I mean, there was still a chance that they missed the playoffs. They had a couple points up on Florida at that point in time. They were coming off a big win over Tampa, but there were no guarantees. So I don't think anyone that supports the team can really complain about any matchup.
Well, just going back to what Steve said, I'm happy we now have a title for this chat. It is The Maple Leafs View the Columbus Blue Jackets as a warm-up. I believe I'm going to quote you on that one, Steve.
Oh, boy. Oh, no.
Did for a clickbait title.
Listen, I know that nobody's a warm-up. Listen, the David Ayres game was 2 months ago this week. So nobody's a warm-up. You can't take anybody for granted.
So that's my next question is, and Chris, you mentioned it there. It hasn't exactly been a smooth sailing season for the Maple Leafs. They were trending in one direction, then they were trending in the other. And then Steve mentioned the David Ayres game, which seems like a million years ago, but that was just part of what has been a very tumultuous up and down season for the Maple Leafs. Does this time off allow them not only to maybe get some of their guys healthy, but also a time, I know Morgan Riley said it in one of the conference calls weeks ago, to reflect and maybe tweak things that they thought didn't go well this season? Does the time off allow them to do that? Does it hurt them? Is that still very much something that we have to wait and find out?
There's so many unknowns with this. Like, I'm fascinated to see it. I mean, I think we could build a case, say a team like St. Louis that didn't get the benefit of a good summer after winning the Cup last year, that a veteran team like that will benefit from this break because obviously their players get to recharge their batteries. But, I think I'm of the personal opinion it's more likely a young team like the Leafs will do well out of this. We don't know how much the guys worked out during the pause, or if they really believe they were going to have to come back. How that's going to go. I think that's going to be a mystery that hovers over all teams. My sense in being on a number of those calls with Leafs players during the pause here is that those guys have been really champing at the bit, and I think that this benefits them. I mean, there was a lot that they dealt with this year. It was a huge roller coaster. Let's face it. I mean, the ups and downs, the coaching change. They had a really great December. It was, that just prior to the break, they went through California against 3 of the worst teams in the league and lost every game. It was going in all directions. I think that in a lot of ways, this releases some pressure. It almost feels like a new season, even though it's not totally a new season. They're not going to be around the media in the way that they were in the past. I think that this could be a positive for the Leafs, but let's face it, we're all just guessing based on how we think all these things will go. And if we've learned anything about the world the last few months, it's hard to know exactly what's happening at any time.
This could be bad for you, CJ. Imagine there's none of the media attention because they literally aren't allowed to interview them, and they win the Stanley Cup. And all of a sudden, that's what was holding them back the whole time.
Whatever happens. We're going to assign a funny narrative, I think, to whatever Cup champion it was. I mean, yeah. I'm of the view if it's one of the veteran teams like Pittsburgh, say, that's won a bunch, you're just going to say, well, this is a team that knows how to do it, and they found a way to get through this pause, and they showed their winning spirit. And if it's one of the newer teams, like Toronto, say, but it could be any number of teams that breaks through, Colorado, you might say they needed some things to be pushed aside to get it done. But do you know what? I don't think there's any asterisk on this. And so if you're a Leafs fan, I think, cheer for your team to win. And to me, it's going to be a legitimate thing if they find a way to get through and get the job done.
Now, Steve, I'll finish with one final question for you. I talked about the Maple Leafs taking time off and decompressing and kind of looking back. I think the David Ayres game might have been a low for you, an emotional low. It might have put a little extra stress on you. So how has this time off helped our good friend Steve Dangle to decompress?
The David Ayres game was so fun. I made the video that night, and then the next morning I woke up to a text from my cousin telling me that was his Friday night beer league goalie who just beat the Leafs. And I'm like, cool, great. It's this. There were just so many layers. But, I had the time, like everyone else, to process what the heck was going on, sort of settle into whatever this new normal is. And a time occurred recently where I was like, God, I just want hockey back so bad. And that's why, I've softened on the 2014 thing. I was like, what? Montreal doesn't deserve to be in. They had 71 points, blah, blah. Let's just play. Let's just have fun. It's not life or death. It's hockey, for crying out loud. It's supposed to be fun. Why you have to be mad? Let's just enjoy it.
Do you know what's awesome about hockey too? The game the Leafs scored 8 against Carolina this year was not the game the emergency goalie appeared. I mean, that just shows you how weird it was. These teams played an 8-6 game on December 23rd, that afternoon game just before Christmas, and then they faced the emergency goalie for almost half a game, and they don't put 8 bomb. I mean, who knows what's going to happen? I think that's the beauty of this too, Steve. But there's a huge unknown about how this playoffs is going to unfold.
Well, guys, I think Steve said it best. Let's just play. I think hockey fans everywhere are hoping that when the time is right, when the time is safe, that we get some hockey back in our lives, no matter what the format is, and we look forward to that. And when that day comes, we'll break it down even more. Chris, Steve, thanks so much for joining us, and have a good day, guys.
You too. God, this was nice.
No canon in this series either.